Welcome to a new episode of Tell Muses, a podcast by storytellers, with storytellers, for storytellers, and anyone interested in stories. Today, Simona and I have the pleasure of having with us, all the way from the US, the one and only Bruce Marcus. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, I remember meeting you once you said you came and all the things we talked about, but sorry, what's your name? I remember who you work for, where you said you live, but as for name retention, my head is just a sieve. You ride a motor scooter, right? Use an old iPhone. Hate the taste of Brussels sprouts, but grow some back at home. Your trans son is a Harvard grad, class of 22? Yeah, I thought so. And your trans daughter got her psych degree last year from NYU. Your wife is a mortician, right? Who cuts hair on the side and black's her favorite color and 60 her shoe size. You said a single published cartoon was your one claim to fame, but hang me by my toenails, I cannot recall your name. You have a dog named P-Rex, right? Not T-Rex, but P-Rex, a Great Dane Yorkie mix who urinates on all your mail and certain shoes he picks, an uncle who is shell-shocked, a cousin who is lame, and a savant nephew who remembers everybody's name. Your aunt was married 16 times and always to furniture makers who bathed their feet in gasoline and worshipped old salt shakers. I recollect your great-great-granddad sailed the Bounty, Maine, fishing for mermaids, but can't recall your bloody name. I don't mean to seem impolite, uncaring, or obtuse. I just, huh? What's that, you ask? Oh, sure. My name is Bruce.
Woohoo!
Very nice.
So people just get a tiny taste of what it is that Bruce Marcus does. So among other things, I know that Bruce, you are a storyteller and a poet and occasionally a musician or a singer or stuff like that. But all this you can tell by yourself if you'd like to tell our listeners a few things about who Bruce Marcus is.
Sure. Well, that was by way of introduction for sure. I originally was captivated by the folk music scene in the 1990s, the singer-songwriters, the 80s and the 90s. And that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a folk musician. So I learned to play guitar and I would write some songs and go around to coffee houses. And I play guitar somewhat competently to accompany myself, but I'm not a great musician. And I found that when I put down the guitar and would do a spoken word piece similar to what I just did, I was a lot more comfortable in front of the audiences. And then I heard some storytellers, and that just opened the door to this amazing world of storytelling. That was 1990 that I fell into storytelling. And so it means I've been doing it for 35 years, which is quite remarkable because I'm only 32 years old.
Good one, Bruce.
And Bruce, what kind of stories do you like to tell?
I like to tell almost entirely original stories. I tell personal stories, I make up fictional stories, and I work a lot with rhyme, as Despina knows. I do rhyming poetry, rhyming stories, and pieces like the one that I just performed, which I would call recitations, which don't quite fall in the story or poem category. And songs.
And songs, of course, yeah. Everything I heard by Bruce so far, Simona, has always been highly entertaining. He always gets us laughing on his screen. But I have not heard you tell any personal tales, Bruce. I don't think it's happened. And I know that telling personal tales is quite a big thing in the US. I see many tellers doing that. So what's the scene like there?
It is. A lot of the scene here is governed by story slams. We have The Moth, which started, I think, in the New York City area and spread all over the country. They have these story slams where there's a theme and people come in and they're only allowed to tell personal stories. So it's really what a lot of people think storytelling only is. But for other people, the personal stories become a gateway drug. They discover the traditional stories and the folk tales and some of the older material, and they branch out into that. And there are a lot of practitioners also of those type of tales here, as well as literary tales, and some people perform stories in entirely silently and mime. So it really runs the gamut here. Historical tales, you name it, people are doing it here. But yes, personal stories do seem to be the long-lasting flavor of the moment here in the United States.
How does it work for you when you decide to perform a personal tale? So, for example, do you go around with a notebook and whenever something strange, unexpected happens, do you write some notes and then you think about it and perform it? How is your process?
Typically for personal tales, I'll make them up in my head. They tend to be about things that happened in the past. Rhyming stories, I definitely go around with a pen and paper. That is absolutely has to be written down.
I think that using rhyme to tell a story helps with memorizing. It was a technique used by the bards in the past, and all the great epics were written not necessarily in rhyme, but in a metric sequence, in rhythm. So that helps with memorizing and reciting, I think.
Mm. Yes, it would be an aid to that. There's a flip side of that though, and that is that rhyme is very precise
Yeah,
and therefore very demanding. And if you lose your place, you are completely out of the story. It's harder to just say, "Oh, and what I forgot to tell you was," or what
true,
I mean to say. It's
true, true.
it's it's a lot trickier that way. And then
Yes.
every once in a while,
Sorry.
I find for myself, I've written a couple of pieces where I have passages that are very, very difficult to memorize.
I've heard some people tell in the Moth that you mentioned, and I think that some of the tellers who do tell personal tales use techniques they've gathered from folk tales or magical tales, etc., and they interweave them in their stories, in their telling.
So
I
a
guess.
braided story where you have a personal tale kind of weaving in and out of a folk tale kind of thing.
Yes, yes. You intertwine it with magical narrative. It's like a tall tale, really, where you have, something that actually happened, but you take it to such incredible lengths that, until one point, people believe they're listening to an actual story, and then it's incredible that it cannot be.
Hmm. I don't know if that kind of thing would be allowed at the Moth,
Ah,
but other places certainly. And I help produce and host a weekly gathering of storytellers called the Story Space that's hosted here out of the Boston, Massachusetts area. But we're on Zoom. So you folks out there in the international audience, you can join us any Tuesday evening, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern time. And we have a 2-hour session where the first hour is all open telling, 8-minute limit. And then the second hour, we have a featured storyteller who holds forth for about 40 minutes. And we pay our features too, not incidentally. And really, the sky's the limit there. We allow any kind of story, not just personal stories, but all of the things that we've mentioned so far in this session. About the only thing we endeavor to discourage is hate speech. Anything that will leave anybody listening feeling personally bad.
yeah, of course. That has nothing to do with storytelling anyway. That is pointless. It's just that, the time that most things happen, most interesting things happen in the US would be like 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning for Europeans. So it's kind of hard to follow things that are addressed to adults.
Yes, and that makes it a little tricky for us to get some of our features from Europe
Yeah,
because our features go on at, for instance, at 8 o'clock, and in UK that's midnight.
yeah,
No, that's 1 o'clock in the morning.
I think
So
so.
night owls are people who are willing to hang on, stay up that late,
Yeah,
like Rona Barber, for instance.
exactly. Yeah. She's a late owl. Good. So Simona usually asks this, but this time I'll be the one asking. What got you hooked into storytelling in the first place? Was it one particular show one particular storyteller that you heard and captivated you? How did it happen for you?
Yes, I think I would point to two sessions. One was when I was probably a teenager or somewhere in college. In the autumn here in New England, we have a lot of wonderful harvest kind of stuff. And farms like to have events. And I went to a farm and there was a storyteller there. And I sat and I listened to her a bit. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. And then I had a period of time when I first graduated college. I was always into writing. So I come into storytelling from a writing background. I would write extra short stories in English classes in school and take creative writing in college and after college. And there was a period of time when I first graduated college that I was interested in really expanding my palette of expression. I learned to play guitar. I took a cartooning class and more creative writing. And I was also seeing a lot of shows. And at that time, I got tickets to see a gentleman named Jay O'Callahan. He lives on the South Shore here in Massachusetts, in Marshfield, Massachusetts, and he's a nationally known, maybe an internationally known storyteller.
Would you mind repeating the full name?
His name is Jay O'Callahan, and he's getting up there in age now, but he's quite an amazing writer and performer. In fact, when NASA, the National Aeronautic and Space Administration here in the United States, was celebrating their 50th anniversary, they commissioned him to write a piece in celebration of that. So he's performed on major stages like the Lincoln Center in New York City, and he's been multiple times headliner at the National Storytelling Festival. And I saw him in the very early 1980s do a show called The Edge of the Sea. There's two stories that he does in this show. In the first half, he does a show called The Straits of Magellan. And the theater darkened, and he came on stage and introduced us to the captain and many members of the crew, took us back to 15th century Spain, took us halfway around the world. And I thought I was on board this ship looking at these people interacting with each other. And when intermission came and the story was over and the lights came on in the theater, and I was back in 1980s Cambridge, Massachusetts, I just about had the top of my head blown off. And I was hooked. So I started going to a lot of storytelling shows. I would usher there at these storytelling shows. And one of the storytelling series, Stories After Dark, it was a series for adults. They used to have a story swap before each performance, and I was ushering there. And I sat down and I did one of my little spoken word pieces, probably a rhyming one. And one of the people who heard me that day was a woman who was a docent at the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow Historic Site in Cambridge. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, if you don't know, was a poet back in the 1800s who lived in a magnificent mansion on Tory Row on Brattle Street, just outside of Harvard Square in Cambridge. Tory Row was where the British loyalists all lived at the time of the American Revolution. A lot of them had to flee and abandon their magnificent mansions. And at the time, at that historic site, they had classical music series and a poetry series. And Lucy thought, well, Henry was a storyteller. And she was taking classes at Lesley College in storytelling. She thought, why not a storytelling series? And she happened to hear me that day do this little spoken word piece and invited me to be one of 5 storytellers that did a show 2 weeks apart, 3 shows altogether in the summer of 1990. And that was my education and my entree into storytelling. And from there, I never looked back.
It's wonderful. Bruce, you said that you also perform your own stories. So what kind of stories do you write and perform? What genre of stories?
Personal stories, fictional stories, and then there's all the rhyming stuff. So there's poetry, both funny and serious, rhyming and non-rhyming.
Charles,
Recitations, which are that's a kind of general term that encapsulates rhyming stories, rhyming poems, and pieces that are an exploration of an idea that's sort of neither poem nor story.
when you say fictional stories, do you mean, for example, stories that remind us to the folk genre? Or, for example, do you write gothic stories? Do you write, I don't know, detective stories, tales of the unexpected? How would you define the kind of stories that you write?
For fictional, they cover a few different categories. Some of them would be things that would be contemporary. And I've also riffed on some traditional stories like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table kind of thing. I've got three Bible stories that I've mutilated and forced into verse to what I prefer to think is comic effect. So it can really run the range. I don't narrow my choices. Whatever inspiration comes to me, I just run with it and let it come out in whatever form it wants to, a story, a recitation, a song.
What you said was really interesting. You said that you took some Bible stories and you made them into verse. So, how did you do this? I write some rhyming stories myself, but I have my process and I don't know if it's the same as yours. So, I'm interested to know what kind of process do you use when you take a story that already exists and write it in verse.
I'm curious, what language do you write in? English, Italian?
I mostly write in English, yes.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Rhyming in English, that's kind of difficult for me. So that's why I use a rhyming help, some websites that help me with the rhymes.
Yeah.
And I go from the end of what I want to say to the beginning. So I find a rhyme and then I structure the sentence starting from the end.
Oh,
And
interesting. Interesting. Yeah. I try to have a general storyline in mind, and I try to base it largely on the original story. But when I do a Bible story, I'm not particularly religious and I'm not preaching. I'm interested in finding some ways to make the story more comical, adding elements that did not exist in there originally.
My mind is processing things as you talk, and I was just thinking of the whale digesting something that provoked vomit so that Jonah came back to life.
That's exactly the kind. Yep, yep, yep.
I see. Okay, that would be
Yeah,
interesting. Surely.
Jonah unwraps his lunch and it's fish that's a couple of weeks old, and he tosses it aside, and it
Exactly,
sickens the
that was
whale
it. It
instead of
was
him.
it was fish that had gone bad. Yeah. Surely your versions will be much more popular with the kids.
Well, you never know until you try.
Bible stories would not work for me. I am quite the opposite of a religious person, so but I could try it in other kind of
Well,
stories, I guess.
same with me. I just, a popular story is a popular story.
Indeed. I was thinking of this thing you said, this performance that captivated you, and we have quite a few people here in these interviews that we do for the podcast that have had a similar experience, some sort of transcending experience by listening to one storyteller and having all these very vivid images in their mind, for example, or thinking about the story again and again after you've heard it, after days pass, and you just can't stop thinking about it, which I think is one of the strongest motives I can think about why people should carry on telling stories. You never know when you're going to inspire somebody to just try storytelling out.
To think that we as storytellers could be that person who inspires somebody
Yeah,
else.
imagine being
Why?
that person, exactly. You never know.
Mm.
What other things do you do at Story Space? Would you like to talk to us a bit about that?
We have been together, we've been going since 1992. The series was founded by a nationally known, probably internationally known storyteller named Brother Blue, who is a very eccentric and unique character and somewhat of a polarizing figure. A lot of people really loved him, and he deeply, deeply affected their lives. At the same time, some people didn't get him and were turned off, and some even repelled by him. But he was very well known when the National Storytelling Festival turned some round number down in Jonesboro, Tennessee, here in the States. And all the major national glossy magazines like Smithsonian Magazine and others went down there with their camera people. He was naturally the focus of a lot of the attention because he was so eccentric in the way he presented himself. He wore blue. With a ballpoint pen, he would draw butterflies on his cheeks and hands because he had a signature story about butterflies. He would put on bells and ribbons, and he was the ultimate extrovert, always trying to draw people in. And he was just a very, very interesting guy. So he started the series. He and his wife, Ruth Edmonds Hill, started the series in 1992, and he became incapacitated and could no longer do it after he'd been running the series for almost 18 years. And his wife then handed the series off to a couple people who ran it for almost a year, and then they handed it off to half a dozen of us who have kept it going. And with the pandemic, we've been on Zoom. So what we've been is pretty much a kind of a breeding ground and laboratory for all different kinds of storytelling, experimental and otherwise, in a place where people can come develop their chops. They can try it in true chestnuts, or they can tell stories that are still in the development phase, and everything is welcomed with open arms. We're not a critiquing group. We don't generally comment on people. We give encouragement and praise, but we just mainly there to tell and listen to the stories. And then the feature spot is nice because it gives an individual some elbow room, a chance, a nice time slot to really kind of put a cohesive program together and really present something longer, or a number of shorter pieces that tie together or don't as they choose, because it's really their time to do with as they please.
This is the weekly meeting, correct, Bruce?
Correct.
Do you also run, for example, a festival or special events with this group?
Not usually. We have had a couple of anniversary events when we turned 20 and 25. And I have been involved in producing some other things for other groups in the past, but not this group. This group is mainly about meeting on a weekly basis and just jamming.
One little detail of what you said caught my attention. You said that he had a signature story. So what is a signature story?
A signature story is one that a storyteller would tell often.
Okay.
And really kind of defines them in a way. He actually had a couple or a few of those, but he had one about a butterfly that was, I don't remember exactly a caterpillar who made a chrysalis and morphed into this butterfly. And he had an improvisational style, but he did rhyme a lot. And there were a lot of Shakespearean references and music and stamping his feet and snapping his fingers and blowing into the harmonica and and that sort of thing. And so this butterfly story, because he took the butterfly as largely a symbol, and as I mentioned, he drew it all over himself and wore butterfly jewelry pins, some of which actually I own now. That was one of his signature stories. I would say another one was about a teacher who saw some potential in him when he was quite young.
I see. So do you have a signature story then?
Possibly not,
Okay.
but I can tell you a personal story if you would like.
We would like you to tell us any story you like.
People could pretend as a signature story if they want to, but it's a personal story. And because it's an international audience, I picked this particular story to share with you. About a quarter of a century ago, my wife and I traveled to Russia, and we brought home a couple of, well, souvenirs. Actually, we brought home a whole suitcase full. We brought an empty suitcase to fill with souvenirs, some for ourselves, some to give as gifts. But two souvenirs in particular that we dared not transport via suitcase without incurring some serious unwanted attention at the customs counter were an infant girl, almost 1, and a boy who was nearly 3. Now, before we embarked on this epic adoption journey, one of many, many things that kept me awake at night staring at my bedroom ceiling was the thought that we were about to become parents of this little toddler guy who spoke only Russian, while we spoke virtually none. In fact, some people asked us, "Do you speak Russian?" And we were forced to answer, "Niet." Well, we traveled to Russia, met our kids. People, let me tell you, meeting your children for the first time in a foreign orphanage is one of the more surreal, positive experiences life can possibly hand you. But meet them we did, and then we visited them there, as we were required to do, for a week and then a little bit beyond a week. And at the end of a week and a half, the Russian authorities, in a courtroom session where they grilled us with many questions, gave us permission to take the children out of the orphanage and keep them. I'll mention also that when we were visiting them at the orphanage, we had translators there, thankfully, so that everything that we said and read to the almost 3-year-old boy who became our son was translated for us from English into Russian. Well, when we brought our new son back to our hotel room, he was Alice in Wonderland. He walked around the room touching absolutely everything, running his hand over the bed and, oh, the TV screen. He's 25 years old now, and his fascination with screens has not diminished one little bit. He opened every drawer in the room multiple times, picked up the telephone. I said, whoa, no international telephone toll calls there, please, young man. But when he showed interest in the bedside lamp, I detected a teaching moment. I flipped the wall switch next to the lamp up, and the lamp blinked to life. Light on, I told him. I flipped the switch down. The light went dark. Light off, I said. I repeated the exercise. Switch up, light on. Down, light off. Well, my new son, delighted, seized the switch and began flipping it up and down while I tried my best to keep up. Light on, light off, light on, light off, light on, light off, until I was afraid he was going to wear the switch and me out. Well, during the few days that we spent in that Russian hotel room, a fairly encouraging thing happened. One day I handed my son a little crumpled up piece of paper and I said, will you throw this away for me? Well, he took the piece of paper and stood there looking a little bit uncertain. There's a wastebasket in the bathroom, I told him. Whereupon he promptly turned around and toddled off toward the bathroom. Well, I followed him quietly, and when I got to the bathroom door, I peeked around the corner and watched as he padded across the white tile floor, and sure enough, threw that crumpled piece of paper right into the waste paper basket. And I remember thinking, no, here was a little boy who almost certainly had never even heard the English language 2 weeks before. And I remember thinking, maybe this language barrier isn't going to be so difficult after all. Well, we traveled back home, brand new family of 4, and shortly after our arrival, our son turned 3, and at that time we had him evaluated by an international adoption medical specialist, both kids actually, and they were found to be basically healthy. We also had my son evaluated for his cognitive development. The test had to be administered in Russian, and he was found to have some residual deficits. Thought not to be anything wrong with him, but as a result of growing up in the rather bland environment of an orphanage for so long. So our goal then became to have our son caught up to his peers and speaking English by the time he was 5 years old and ready to enter kindergarten. Time was on our side, but we had some work cut out for us. Meanwhile, he was already beginning to speak some English, generally 2-word sentences, generally where the first word was want, as in want crackers, want juice, want cookies, and my own personal favorite, want kiki. That was his little guy word for kefir. And it had nothing to do with Russian. My understanding is that the Russian is very similar to the English for that yogurt drink, kefir. Well, one day he and I were sitting down and I was showing him the photo album from my wife's and my wedding. Mama, Daddy, he said, yeah, that's right. That's us. Now, in this photo album were photos taken with whatever cameras our guests had brought with them to the event, and with some of the disposable film cameras that we'd left out on the table. Remember disposable film cameras? Remember film cameras? As you turned each page, there was a grouping of colorful photos that we thought kind of went well together. Now, the only professional photographer at the wedding was not one we hired. It was a relative, my wife's cousin Brad, who's known for some of his artful work in black and white. My son and I were flipping through page after page of these groupings of colorful photos when we came upon one of cousin Brad's, an artful 8 by 10 black and white. Well, my son had never seen a black and white photo before. He pointed at it excitedly and, summoning all the descriptive power of his limited English, knowingly squeaked, "Light off!" His English language development came quickly after that. When he was 4, he was evaluated again, this time in English. And at that time, he was found to be solid to age 5 for his expressive language, 1 year beyond his actual age, and solid to age 6 for his receptive language. No, I'm sorry, I got it backwards. Solid to age 5 for his receptive language and solid to age 6 for his expressive language. And for a long time, he remained a much better talker than a listener. But the day that I knew he was a fully fluent English-speaking, English-thinking boy, he was 5 years old and sitting on our living room sofa next to my daughter, who was 3 at the time, watching PBS Kids, our public broadcasting channel here in the United States, during a fundraiser. Somewhere in between the popular US shows Sesame Street and Curious George, a woman came on and said, "Hello, my name is so-and-so, and PBS Kids is marvelous programming for children. It's educational as well as entertaining, yada yada, blah, 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 on and on for minutes, putting up what must have sounded to my 2 small children like this impenetrable wall of adult speak, until it finally reached the point where my 5-year-old son turns to his 3-year-old sister, points to the woman on the TV screen and says, 'You can't understand her. She's speaking Spanish.'" So there's a little story about my son's English language acquisition.
That was a wonderful, wonderful story. And Espina, at the beginning, you were nodding and cheering. Is it a story that you've already heard from Bruce?
Yes, yes, I had heard it before, but I did not remember that one with the Spanish-speaking lady who was muted, but I was laughing out loud.
Yeah, that was so funny, and it's nice that also you connected different episodes of your life and your son's life with a thread that weaved through them. This light on, light off, for example, which came up years later.
Well, actually, weeks later or months
Oh,
later.
right.
Yeah, yeah. You know, you raise an interesting point that is a good thing to mention about personal stories. A lot of people, when they tell personal stories, when they're newer, particularly when they're newer in crafting personal stories, they'll say, "And then we got in the car, and then we drove there, and the traffic was heavy, and then we got there, and we had to wait in line." And they'll tell you all the details. And what you really need to do with a personal story is edit out all the incidental details, the ones that don't move the story forward. That's a good thing, I think. And your comment actually put me in mind of that.
That's exactly like in books or in films. You never see your characters going to the toilet or driving unless something happens during that. We always say life is not a film because there are so many things that happen in between, but then it's not as entertaining as a film. But when you go back and you weave a story with what happened, putting things together, then it sounds like a film.
And I think storytellers can probably benefit from understanding elements of film editing. I see a piece of film on the wall behind you. Are you a filmmaker or a photographer? The frames are very different, so I'm going to guess photographer.
I'm actually not. It's just a photo frame. It's not even our pictures. We bought it and then we just kept the little pictures that were inside because they were nice.
This is exactly what Bruce was talking about when he mentioned the old type cameras, the ones that contained film inside. This is what it actually looked like. What you said, Simona, brought in mind a Spanish storyteller who, during his tales, he often says, "And then they were happy, but we'll skip that part because nobody cares about other people's happiness." Let's carry on. And it is how it is. But Bruce, I think it's the other way around. I don't think that storytellers are the one who can benefit from film editing, although it can be a vice versa process. In fact, I was thinking of the economy of speech when it comes to folk tales. You don't have anything that does not have to do with the plot and its continuation, as you said it. There are no mundane details. So maybe people tend to forget that when they are reciting their own personal tales. But if we think of folk tales, these things are not there. It's just a very basic structure of things moving along. So film editors, storytellers, people who tell personal tales anyone who tries to do some creative writing or narration or whatever kind can benefit from that technique. It's very simple, very elemental, and it has to be followed.
Storytelling in all its various forms, yes.
Even, I mean, before literary tales, when it was just oral speech, what people used to do for entertainment in the villages, there was no descriptive language in it. You might use some to set the setting at first, but then it's action, action, action. It's one thing happening after another. And when things get stuck, you have the magical helper or, some kind of divine intervention that carries the plot on.
Yes, if you want to be descriptive, you want it to be evocative, not just exposition, but you want it to convey something, an
Yes,
emotion or a mood or the sereneness or the danger of a
exactly.
particular setting. Or
You want to suck people into the atmosphere, but not give them so clear images that they do not use their own imagination, for example.
I find when the parts and stories where people are delivering just exposition, just a simple description, I flatline.
Yeah. You tune
And
out.
particularly if it's at the beginning of the story, I want to be thrown right in. I want to be thrown right into a piece.
It's very easy for people, especially nowadays with a very short attention span that we have because of all the screen time we spend. It's very easy to tune out, so it has to be action if you want to keep people engaged.
And probably the short attention span is a lot of it is the fault of filmmakers who do all this jump cutting now. You never have an image on screen for more than like 2 or 3 seconds.
Same
And it's
thing on social media, I think. Everybody goes for short videos and they just scroll all the time.
mm-hmm. Whereas if you sit down and just listen to a storyteller, you get a face in place for some period of time and you get to focus your attention.
Some people do these stories that are very relaxing and in a very soft voice that help people concentrate and fall asleep. This sound like hubris because I never have trouble falling asleep. Anywhere I lay my head, I just put it on a rock and I'm out. But some people do have trouble sleeping at night, and I think that stories are a wonderful tool to help people with insomnia or whatever.
What greater compliment can you give a storyteller than to say that he or she puts people to sleep?
Some people might take offense in that actually, or maybe they think that their story is not interesting enough. But to me, honestly, it is compliment. If you just help people to relax enough so that they nod off, it's wonderful. It's one of the magical things that storytelling can do. We needn't be alert all the time. We can also use storytelling for relaxing purposes.
I never thought of it that way, but yeah.
There is this story, a folktale, about a king whose father dies in a very young age, and his mother is teaching him life lessons through the stories she tells every night before he goes to bed. But then he loses his mother as well, and he cannot go to sleep. He has trouble sleeping, so he calls all the storytellers from the kingdom, all the famous ones who use the best words or have the more talent, and they try their skills to impress the king, but none of it works until one of the lesser employees in the palace gardens thinks that he has some stories from his childhood and he has nothing to lose, just stands the same chance as anybody else. So he goes and tells the king stories, and finally the king can relax and go to bed as he used to when he was a child.
Yeah, there's that primal aspect of being told stories, isn't there?
And we're not actors, we're not acting, it's a different kind of performance.
Well, for some storytellers, there is a lot of acting involved, and I think that's another neat thing about storytelling is people bring into it, if they've had a dance or movement background or a strong writing background, if they're musical, play an instrument or sing, or if they have an acting background, they can incorporate that into the storytelling. So I would say there's not necessarily acting, but sometimes there is some acting involved. Changing your voice for the different characters,
Yeah.
changing your physical gestures and stance for the different characters.
And music, of course. Anyway, this particular kind of art, oral storytelling, can be combined with so many different things. And of course, you might get elements, but to me, at least, the main difference between storytelling and acting, other than the technical stuff, other than the fact that you do not learn the words by heart necessarily, you kind of improvise every time. It will be the same story, but the wording will not be exactly the same. But the main difference for me is that a storyteller is not the star on the screen. He is not the one in the spotlight. A storyteller is a channel through whom the story passes, and it reaches other people's ears, and if they're good at what they do, their hearts as well.
Yep. Ideally, yes.
I really like this, what you're talking about, and about the difference also between all storytellers, because each storyteller is unique based on what they have done in their previous life, if we can call it like that, because each of us has a different background, and we bring everything that we did and we do into our stories. So that makes us who we really are. And whenever we tell a story, we bring who we are and what we did into what we're saying. And that's something that I really, really like about storytelling, because whenever you hear someone telling a story, you're learning something about them, because you see that person. Yes, it's a performative art at the end of the day, but also bringing who they are and their background into the story. So that's something I really like about storytelling and personal storytelling as well, because I didn't know you, Bruce, before we started the interview, and now I know something about you through the personal story that you just told us.
Now you know that he's a wonderful person, and you realize this is why I wanted him here with us.
Oh, I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you.
No, you shouldn't. You should take it as an offense.
I'm offended by that. And the other thing you were mentioning, I absolutely agree that people bring their backgrounds and everything else. And there's also the personality and chemistry element too. One thing that fascinates me about storytelling is that every storyteller has his or her own strengths. And there's in different styles and techniques and things that really, really work for them that they bring to the transmission of the story to the listeners. And I find that aspect of it fascinating too.
I absolutely agree. And also from the style of the story that they're telling and how they're telling the story, you learn aspects of their personality. So, for example, I love some storytellers who tell stories very calmly. Maybe the storytellers that Despina was talking about earlier, they're calm and they use their voice very calmly, and I love this kind of storytelling, and I tried doing it and it was like, no, it's just not me. I'm very energetic whenever I tell a story. I move around and I cannot keep still, and I try to be witty, and that's just who I am, and I cannot tell a story in a style that is not me, because it doesn't work for me. I can do it, but it just doesn't work. It doesn't have, I think, the same feeling when I'm telling that kind of stories.
No, I think you mean it doesn't come out naturally, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You remind me of a storytelling session I was watching just the other day where there was a storyteller on and she was very comic and she was very loud and frenetic and all kinds of wild gesticulations and everything. And by the end of the story, it was kind of like, what? And the next storyteller, I was so thankful, came on and was that calm style of storytelling. And it was just a welcome relief at that point. But it was nice to have the two different styles as well. And I'll look forward to hearing you tell a story sometime, Simona.
Thank you.
We have to lure Simona into coming to Headliners. Yeah, that one would be more like, what are you, 7 hours ahead?
I'm 7 hours ahead. Simona is 6, so
6.
yeah.
Yeah, so that would just be 3:30 in the afternoon for you, I think.
No, it's still evening. I think it's 9:30 for me, should be 8:30.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, it's 2:30 and for me, so yeah, it would be 7:30, it would be 8:30 would starting time for you, I think.
Bruce accept mass, I do too.
That's why I'm a storyteller.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I'm very impressed when I meet storytellers who have been scientists or whatever, they have had some academic career. It's very impressive for me how people are able to balance these two sides of the brain, really. Yeah, normal storytellers like you and I, Bruce, do not do so well
We
at this.
we used to have a storyteller who lived in this area who was a metallurgist.
Oh,
And I think he taught at MIT, so he would tell stories all about how different metal compounds were formed historically and that sort of thing.
quite interesting. Yeah, I think if you can, put some element of stories in science, it makes science so much more interesting. It's an excellent talent as well.
Good teaching tool, good public speaking tool,
Exactly.
all kinds of great uses for storytelling.
Using STEM in teaching is a fad right now, and it's superb.
And I think all the major religions were formed around a story.
If you look at it as a story, as, storytelling, the whole thing of religions are based on, I think it's just an attempt of humans to pass knowledge and sometimes morals to the next generations. And there is no better way to do that than through stories. So, Bruce, I've been meaning to ask you, if people are interested in finding out more about you, where should they look?
Well, this time I don't have a website, so come to the Story Space on Tuesday night. If you Google the Story Space, we should come up pretty early in your search, like at the top or almost at the top. And you can visit our website and see, once again, the time that we're meeting, which is Tuesday evening, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time, depending what time of year. And you'll see who our upcoming featured storyteller is for that week with a blurb and a photograph. And we'd love to see both of you, certainly, and anybody who's listening to this discussion.
One Wednesday morning when I'll be. I never have insomnia, Bruce. It's a malady.
Or
But
you wake up early. Yeah, it's not a great time for you. No.
maybe sometime it will happen. And if I wake up that late, I will certainly come and join you.
Yeah, or if you're motivated enough to be a feature for us.
Ooh, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I must have had several cups of coffee. Italian coffee, Simona, my favorite on that day.
$60 American as well.
There you go. That's enough money for coffee.
Honorarium. Yeah.
So, Bruce, would you like to give us a little bit of your creative work to finish this interview with?
Sure. Shall I do something else comic or something more serious? What do you
It's
think? Any
entirely up to
preference?
you. I'm in for anything you like.
Entirely up to me. Well, let's keep the mood light then. Now, you can't tell just simply listening to my voice, but I am a couple of inches north of 6 feet in height. And I decided one day to craft a recitation about the experience of what it's like when you're tall. When you're tall, some folks ask, "How tall are you?" As though they can't just see for themselves. Some say, "You're tall," as if you'd never noticed, or just might mistake them for elves. When you're tall, you can see quite well over crowds where small folks are always complaining. Sure, you might have to duck under low-hanging trees, but are the first to know when it's raining. When you're tall, your long-legged strides take you quickly off toward the places you're bound, certain wherever you walk, stand, or sit, your feet will always reach the ground. When you're tall, you need no step ladders or stools to access things others can't reach. That high upper shelf, the bulb that needs changing, or to pick a red apple or ripe juicy peach. When you're tall, nothing fits. From clothing to cars, low ceilings and doorways, airplane seats. Gloves are too short, and those shoes you just bought eventually will cramp your feet. When you're tall, you're insulted that clothing in cars that do fit can be quite expensive. While the song Short People by Randy Newman, you find Roland quite inoffensive. When you're tall, you look down toward most of the people you see and you talk to each day. And when you meet someone who's taller, you find your neck doesn't, go up that way. When you're tall, you need a bicycle helmet most of the time you're indoors. You've banged your poor noggin so many times it's bruised and it's bumpy and sore. When you're tall, you find too many mirrors hung only half-mast at best. When you peer into one, you're lucky to glimpse even as high as your chest. When you're tall and a kid and you play hide and seek, it can be hard to find and take cover. As a grown-up, you learn to stand a wee bit downhill for kisses and hugs from your lover. When you're tall, kids think you're a marvel. They talk and point behind your back. Paul Bunyan's your favorite folk hero, bar none, and you root for the giant, not Jack. When you're tall, folks seem to want to stand next to touch, or even to be you. They treat you like some kind of freak show exhibit, but won't pay a nickel to see you. When you're tall, some folks ask, how's the weather up there? Do you play basketball? Do birds nest in your hair? Honestly, when you're tall, you never can hide in a crowd. Beds are too short and planes are too loud. Now, when you're tall, some folks wonder if your parts they can't see are all just as long as the rest. Well, in case this thought keeps you up at night, I'll tell you. The answer is yes. When you're tall, you're easy to find in a crowd. You stand out in photos. Your parents are proud. When you're tall, folks' comments can get overzealous. But deep down, you know that's just 'cause they're jealous. When you're tall, some folks ask, well, how tall are you? I tell them I'm 5'15". Some say, you're tall. I would say, you're not. But dang it, I'm just not that mean. And there is a little slice of what life is like when you are vertically enhanced.
I'm vertically enhanced as well. I'm a 5'7" girl, so I can totally relate to your poem.
And my father was about 6'3" at his tallest, and my mother was 5'4", and he always used to go around saying, it's better to love a short woman than never to have loved a tall.
I'm trying to calculate how tall I am. I don't know how.
Yeah, I don't know what 6'3" translates to in degrees Celsius, but
So what did your mom say to that?
oh, she was immune to his humor.
I bet they're a very successful couple then.
They produced me and my sister, so.
Simone is still trying to find out how
Yeah,
tall
I'm
you are.
5'3".
Yeah, so about my mom's height, yeah, down there.
Thank you very much for being with us, Bruce. It's been highly entertaining, as always.
My pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me. What a delight. It's good. It's great to get to know you a little better, Despina, and to meet you, Simona, and I look forward to crossing paths with you in our international storytelling community again and soon.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Bruce.
Is this a podcast?
We're putting it up for free because we enjoy doing that. We just wanted, to bring our global community together. So it's not monetized, it's just for fun. We started with Liz Weir. I'm sure you know her, the Irish lady. Here's Crow. So each Sunday we upload an episode. Yeah, this is how it goes.
Oh, that's really cool. We've had Here's Crow as a feature at Story Space, both online, I think, and in person, back when we were entirely in person.
It's very, very interesting because we get many different backgrounds of people and many different ways of storytelling. So this has been hugely interesting for us. And hopefully it will be for people who listen.
On the 25th of May.
Yes, 25th of May is when your episode is coming out, Bruce.
Got it. So that when it comes out on the 25th, that is going to be just 2 or 3 days before the Sharing the Fire Storytelling Conference here in the Northeast.
Right.
It's going to be in Glens Falls, New York, and it's a marvelous, marvelous conference. If you have time and discretionary income to attend, I would highly encourage you, and I'd love to meet you both in person as well. It's fantastic.
It's in my bucket list.
Yeah, the quality of the workshops is very high. The performance is the keynote speaker, the swaps, the parties late at night. It's just a fabulous, fun time. And this year I auditioned and was accepted to be in the Saturday night show, which is nice.
Excellent. Excellent. I wish you all the luck and success.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for the opportunity. This was a lot of fun.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.